Hey, what's going on guys, TurtyWurty here, and welcome back to another Forge modding tutorial for Minecraft 1.17. In this tutorial we are going to be covering much requested and highly anticipated block entities. So block entities may sound a bit strange, and that is because they are essentially what we call tile entities now. So they've changed from tile entities and they're now called block entities. So that's might be a little bit confusing of a change at first, but you do get used to it. It took me a little while, but yeah. So if you're not aware of what a block entity is, it is basically a normal it's basically something you apply to a block which allows you to save special data and do stuff every tick. There's a bunch of stuff you can do with them. They're extremely useful, something like the furnace, the chest, the beacon, all those different things. They are block entities because they store stuff and they do special functions. So what I'm going to be doing in this tutorial is quite stupid. I am going to be making a toilet, and this is a suggestion by Brammy15. He is in my Discord server, so a special thanks to him for his great suggestion. And essentially this toilet will simply store, it'll basically store the amount of times you have gone on the toilet, basically. And in a future tutorial I will also be saving, I will have a keybind for using the toilet, and it will store that instead. But for now, let's just go ahead and get started. So I've already created the block and I've already initialized it down here, and I've also created the item, I'm pretty sure. Yep, I have. And for this tutorial I have also gone ahead and created an entity, and this is just so that the toilet is sittable. So here's my sittable entity. Obviously all of this code will be on my GitHub. You don't need this for a block entity, of course. This is just so that I can sit on the block. It's the best way to do it with an entity, since you can just make it a rideable entity that is invisible. So this is an invisible entity. Obviously it does have a renderer, so here's the renderer. It doesn't do anything special, it just extends the normal entity renderer, has no texture, and yeah, nothing really is happening here. So let's get started, shall we? So the first thing we want to go ahead and do is create a new init class, and we can call this block entity init. Now block entities are very similar to normal entities in the way that they have entity types, and you can register the type and then you create the entity from the entity type. So as usual, this will just be a final class with a private constructor, and obviously you can throw in that constructor if you wish. And then we'll just create a public static final deferred register of type block entity type, and we'll leave that wildcard and we'll call this block entities. That is equal to deferred register dot create forge registries dot block entities, and then our mod ID. So that is tutorial mod dot mod ID. Just format that and import everything. Okay, then we just need to create the registry object as usual. So public static final registry object. I'm not sure why it's not appearing. There we go. And this will just be of type, and this will be a type block entity type, but then this will take in the class of our block entity. So I'm going to be calling the class just toilet block entity. You could also just do toilet BE if it's too long of a name, but I prefer to have just toilet and then block entity. That's just sticking with vanilla, to be honest, to the best that I can do. And I'm just going to be naming this toilet is equal to block entities dot register toilets, and then a supplier. And very similar to entities here, we are doing block entity type dot builder dot of. Now this is a block entity supplier, so that is basically just a supplier of your block entities constructor. So a method reference is how we like to do this, and that is just going to be toilet block entity, or whatever your block entity class is, colon new. And then we need to supply the valid blocks. So this is basically the blocks that our block entity will work on. So you only want to supply the blocks that you want this block entity to work for. So for me, that will just be block init dot toilet, and obviously that won't work until we do dot get. Okay, obviously we have an error. That is because we don't have such thing as toilet block entity. Okay, let's go into our block class, since we need to go ahead and do a few things. The first thing we need to go ahead and do is implement entity block. And essentially what this does is it allows our block to contain an block entity. So if we just go ahead and add the unimplemented methods, here we go, and that adds the new block entity. We also want to actually go ahead and add get ticker. Okay, let's just rename these. So obviously block pos is pos, and block state is the state. The level is the level, or the world, you could say. The block state, the states, and then the type is just, I guess, just the type. Yeah, and we're not going to want to return the super. I'll leave that blank for a mo. So as you can see, I have already created this class. It's just got the voxel shapes as the horizontal block tutorial does. It's got all this different stuff. I've also created this boolean property for whether it's used or not. This currently is going to be unused. I'm not going to be using this in this tutorial specifically, but I will be using this in a later tutorial. So I'm just going to leave it there. So the first method we want to be covering here is new block entity, and this is called essentially when you place down the block and the block entity is created. So this function is what creates the block entity itself. In here, you just want to be returning block entity init dot toilet dot get dot create, and that just takes in the pos and the state. Obviously that will give us an error because the actual class that this is referencing does not exist. That's perfectly fine. Okay, and the next method is get ticker. So this is basically this is for your tick function. So if you don't want your block entity to tick and you just want it to save data and not tick, then you can just you don't need to override this method. But since I want my block entity to tick, I want it to be able to do some updates every tick, and just to demonstrate ticking, we are going to need to return something in here. And we need to go ahead and return level dot is client side. Now if it is client side, we just want to return null. We don't want it to tick client side. And then we can go ahead and say or, and here is where we need a supplier for the actual ticker. So we need this functional interface right here. if you go into here, you can just see it's a functional interface with this tick method. So it expects a level, a pos, a state, and the block entity itself. So we need to actually go and specify these, and obviously you could make instead a static method and just call like class : static method with your actual class, and obviously that method would instead just take in those parameters. But I prefer to do it this way. That means I don't have to make a static method and I don't have to have any arguments. Instead, I'm going to have $0, and I'll explain I'll explain why I'm doing this in a second. And then we'll have $1, and then we'll have $2, and then we'll have block entity, and then we'll just have a supplier, and we will cast our toilet block entity, which obviously doesn't exist right now. We will cast that to block entity. Let's just double brackets this so that we can call .tick. Okay, so let's explain what I'm doing right here. So the reason we have $0, 1, and 2 is because this is the level, the block pos, and the block state. Now, we don't need these. So as you can see here, we already have the level, we already have the state, and I mean, sure, it gives us the pos. So if you wanted to, you could put pos here, but we're not using this pos, as you can see. So there's not really any points. I mean, I guess we could, like, we could say level 0 and state 0. You could do that if you want. In fact, I will do that for just the purpose of showing you. But you can just do $ and then number. That's what I like to do. That just sort of shows that it's unused, it's not needed. You used to be able to do underscore, I believe, but you can't do that anymore. So if I hover over this, you'll see that it says it's a keyword from source level 9 onwards. So yeah, you can't do that anymore. You used to be able to, but not anymore. So yeah, obviously we still have these errors. So let's just go ahead and create our block entity class. I've just created a new package in our block package for entity, and I'll call this toilet block entity. Okay, and this is simply just going to extend block entity. There we go. And let's add the constructor. Now we're actually just going to want to change this constructor, so we're going to want to get rid of this block entity type right there. Let's rename these to pos and state, and then in here we just want to super off our block entity type. So that is block entity init dot toilet, and then obviously dot get to actually get the type. Let's just go back into our init and make sure we import this class so that we can get rid of some errors. It doesn't like that. Did I do something wrong here? Possibly. Let's go into our block class and make sure we import it here. Oh right, this tick method doesn't exist yet. That's fine. But why is this giving me an issue? So supplier of block entity type dot builder dot of, and then toilet block entity new. Right, of course. So we are actually just creating a builder here. We need to build the builder to actually give us the block entity type. Now you can see this takes in a type, and that is basically for the data fixer. Now data fixers is basically what Mojang uses to allow things to persist between versions. So when you update version, it can stay. You don't have to, create a new world. It will basically fix the data for the new version and make it work. Now, we can't really implement this just because Forge, I believe, doesn't really work that way, and data fixers are a pain to work with. There's like a massive essay on how they work, and everyone's too lazy to look through them. So instead, we can just pass in null in here, and that would just be a null data fixer. That's perfectly fine. It does expect null. That's okay. Now this tick method doesn't exist, but we can close that class for now. Actually, yeah, we'll close that class for now, and we can close our block entity init. Oh, while I remember, let's make sure we call our block entity init in here. So let's go block entity init dot block entities dot register and bus, just before we forget about that. Okay, first thing let's do in our block entity class is create this tick method. So let's have public void tick. This is obviously, as I say, only if you have a tick method. You can also, if you wanted to, you could do implements block entity ticker and toilet block entity, and then you could add the unimplemented methods, and then you have the tick method in here. You could do that and obviously just return that inside of here. So you could just return block entity. You could do that if you want, or that doesn't work. But yeah, something like this. I'm not exactly sure why this isn't working. I think I'm just being stupid. Oh right, yeah, so you need to do, but yeah, anyway, basically that. But I'm not going to do that because I don't see the point in having these parameters here. We already have access to all these things in the class itself, so we don't need these. That's just, there's many ways you can implement the ticker. This is just how I like to do it. It makes more sense having a tick method, no parameters, because we don't need parameters. We have all of the stuff already from block entity. So yeah, it's a little weird how that whole system works, but that's just how it is. Okay, the next thing we're going to want to do, let's add the reading and writing. So obviously the main thing with block entities is being able to read and write some NBT. NBT is just basically data that you can save into this specific object. So loading is obviously reading it from the NBT, and saving it is just writing it to the NBT. Yeah, so these are called anytime that these need to happen, which is actually more often than you may think. So obviously we just fill these out with any NBT data we want to save. Now I'm going to go ahead and actually implement this seat entity into this block entity so that I can just save that data. So I'm going to go ahead and do that real quickly. Okay, so I've gone ahead and done that all now. And here it is. So I've also gone ahead and saved everything to the NBT as well. So I'm just using a list tag for this since there's no way to save a map. And here I'm just using getList, but this takes an integer, which is for the type that is saved to the list. So I'm using tag compound, but you can also see there's a bunch of different options here. So yeah, fairly simple. And just saving that to the map in here. And I'm just adding it to the list here and then putting it back into the NBT, which will save it. Yeah, all of that is done. Now the final thing we need to go ahead and do is we need to, well, we don't need to do that. This is actually it. This would work perfectly fine. However, if we wanted any of this data on the client side, say that we were using a GUI, which I will be doing soon, then we need to go ahead and make sure we sync this data to the client side. And the reason being, if we check our block class, we can go ahead and see right here that if it's client side, we just return null for the ticker, and in this use method we only run this if it's not client side, so if it's server side. So all of this basically here is server side, and if we wanted any of this client side, we currently wouldn't be able to do that. It would all be server side, and on the client side it would just all be the default stuff. So if you need it on the client side, we need to go and sync it. Now, I don't need any of this on the client side. However, I'm going to do it just for demonstration purposes. So let's get started. Now, syncing to the client is very, very, very simple. It is way, way, way simpler than it sounds. So there are 3 ways, or let's just say there's 2 ways to sync to the client. And that is syncing on the chunk load, so whenever the chunk loads, and there is syncing every time there's a block update. Now, there is a 3rd way, and that is syncing with a custom packet. So when something happens on the client, you might want to, or when something happens on the server, you might want to then update the client, or vice versa. But we'll just cover the first 2 ways, and we can do the packet in a future tutorial on, say, capabilities. So let's do first on the chunk loading, and there's 2 methods for this, and let's actually override all these methods. So there's handle update tag, and there's get update tag. Now, get update tag will happen when the chunk loads, essentially, and this will just create a compound tag that is sent to the client, and that is received in handle update tag. So yeah, so it's gotten from here and it's received from here. Now all we need to do in these methods is this one, we need to save the MBT, and this one we just need to load the MBT back. So it's as simple as it sounds, to be honest. In here we just want to save of a new compound MBT, or compound tag, isn't it? Yep. And then in handle update tag, simply just load tag. As simple as it can be. Then if we want to synchronize on block update, which you most likely do want to do, there are 2 more methods. That is get update packet and on data packet. So these happens when there is a block update. For example, if you set block with the update flag, then these methods will be called. So obviously it's the same as on chunk load, essentially. However, you're handling with the packets directly. So for get update packet, you just want to return a new client bound block entity data packet, and this takes in the position first, so this dot world position. Then it takes in an ID. Now this is just a vanilla thing, you don't really need to worry about it. You just need to make sure it doesn't conflict with a vanilla ID. And the way to do that is just to set it to -1. You could also set it to 0, but -1 is safer. So that's how I like to do it. And then we just want to do save, and that will be a new compound MBT. Now, let's say, in fact for both of these, let's say there was only specific data you wanted to sync, which ideally you would do. You would only save specific data. And the way you could do that is just simply creating this tag up here. So let's say var tag is equal a new compound tag, and then you would just write your data to this tag. So put int beans ticks, for example. So say you only wanted to save ticks, where'd that go? Where'd that go? There it is. So say you only wanted to do that, and then you could just put in tag here. Ideally, you would do that. You would only save, or you would only sync what you need to sync. But I'm just going to call save. It makes this whole demonstration a lot easier. And where'd that go? It keeps moving around. Okay, there we go. So that is get update packet. That happens when the block update happens. And then on data packets is when that same packet has been received. And here, obviously, you would just load it. So you would load your specific data. But since we're just using save, we just can call load. And that would just be packet.getTag. Very, very simple. Yeah, that's it, actually. So you need to make sure you've done the lang, the block model, the block state, the item model, etc, etc. Textures, of course, if you have any. And yeah, let's go ahead, let's run the game, and let's see if it works. Here we are in the game. Let's place down our beloved toilet. Absolutely fantastic model. I know I spent a very long time on this model. I actually didn't spend very long on it, but you know, that's not the point. We should be able to sit on it. It's not perfect. I mean, you can see you can kind of turn around a little bit. It's a little bit glitchy, but it does work. The aim was just to make sure the head stays in the right place. That is fine. Now I can get off it by pressing Shift, and if I click on it again, it does that. Now you should be able to see if I Shift right click, it says I have shitted 2 times, and if I do it again, now it's 3 times. Fantastic. Now if I save and quit, okay, and as you can see, if I Shift right click, you can see it still says 3 times. And obviously if I reload the game, that will stay there as well. I can obviously spam click on it. Nothing really happens as of yet. Fantastic. But yeah, I intend to do a tutorial very soon on keybinds, so I'll be able to press F or S, because if I do S it doesn't do anything right now. Yeah, no keys actually do anything other than Shift and slash, of course. But yeah, I'll be doing a tutorial on keybinds soon, and we should be able to change some stuff with the toilet when that happens. So that will be very exciting. So yeah, I hope you guys did find this tutorial useful. If you did, please do be sure to smash your face into that like button and subscribe. If you really enjoyed, please do be sure to share it. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next tutorial. Goodbye.